Today I would like to greet our speaker. It's Dr. Marisa Filgueras-Gomez from the Department of Modern Languages. Before I get into it, though, if you haven't signed in, please be so kind as to sign in. And if you haven't got any food, please get some food, because it's lousy to have leftovers. So please help yourself, and there's just a couple of small giveaways as well, should you so desire. So, Dr. Gomez is an assistant professor of Spanish applied linguistics here at FIU. Her main research interests include second language acquisition, bilingualism, heritage language development and education, foreign language teacher education, and study abroad. In her native country of Spain, she obtained her BA in Hispanic Philology, a word that I only learnt this morning. I thought it was a typo. From the University of Seville, which is her home city, and a master's teaching Spanish as a second language, which was from Antonio de Nebrija University in Madrid. She later moved to the US, where she obtained her PhD in Spanish applied linguistics from Georgetown University. She has extensive experience teaching at the college level, both in the US and in Spain, has assisted and directed language and study abroad programs, and her work has been presented in national and international conferences. Since her arrival at FIU in 2016, she has been involved in research on bilingualism and development of Spanish as a heritage language. She's also revamped the Spanish Heritage Language Program at the Modern Languages Department. So, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Gomez.
I have a mic. I don't really know what to do with a mic. Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all for being here today. This is a full house for me. Wow, I cannot believe this. So today we're going to talk about bilingualism and whether this thing about being bilingual, it's easy or not, or what do you feel about that, how easy it is to become bilingual. And everything that I'm going to talk about, it pertains to all kinds of bilinguals. It pertains to people who speak Spanish and English, English and French, French and German, German and Dutch, anything. But for some obvious reasons, I'm going to focus the situation about being bilingual between Spanish and English. So can I have like a hand up of how many people can speak Spanish in this room? Yuppie! Good! That makes me happy. So let's just get started then. So is there anything cool about being bilingual? Anything that you can think of? What's cool? Like what? Just anything. Just tell me one thing that is cool. Because your parents may not talk the other language, right? So you get time to some gossip or something. Tell me. Oh, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Something else. Somebody, I saw another hand around. Same. We gotta be careful now. Spanish it's spoken in many places, so it's not like another language that is less spoken. Like they may know it, right? But yeah, sure. So it helps you with other languages, right? So it was a good thing that you could speak another language, right? So if you are in trouble, like it's a lot nicer. Sure. So I see that you guys have find some pretty cool things about being bilingual, right? So being bilingual, some of the people who are bilingual are told that they are like the ninjas of the language. They're like multitasking. They're doing several things at the same time. And as somebody mentioned, they open an entire new world about maybe being sexy. Are we sexier if we are bilinguals? Let's see what let me see if we can see. Get this? Sure. Anything. Just
Most people in the United States had to spend some time in the school days trying to learn another language, but a recent poll shows that they probably should have tried a little harder to make that second language stick. A survey conducted by the language learning app Babbel revealed that 71% of Americans and 61% of Brits think that someone who speaks more than one language is more sexy than someone who only spoke English. The study also showed that 90% of the English speakers in the survey would try to learn another language if it meant they could find romance. On top of that, over half of the people in the survey said that they dreamed of finding romance with someone in another country.
So it's clear that it seems to be that the bilinguals get sexier, according to 71% of people in the U.S. That you can also, talk to your family, and you can talk maybe to your grandma and those uncles and aunts in those big meals that you have. You may actually be happier if you were not speaking the language, so you didn't have to answer about your boyfriend situation or your girlfriend situation. But it's true that it opens the possibility, right? It's also cool because you don't have to read the subtitles in those movies, right? And some people feel like they can be double mischievous, just like she said about speaking the things behind their parents. You can insult, gossip, understand memes, flirt, and sing any song that is sang by any Spanish speaker, right? And in the future, it could also open some doors for your professional development, right? So maybe now you're like, I really hated those Spanish classes, but later on they're like, yep, I can speak it. I'm one of those. So is there any downside of being bilingual? No, nothing you can think of. I cannot keep up with the movie and you at the same time, right? it's just too much. Any other thing? Well, kind of in line with that, some people find annoying that when they have the friends that don't speak the language, they're like, come on, teach me how to say this and that and blah, blah, blah. I'm a teacher. I like teaching, even if it's a swear word. I don't mind. I find it kind of fun. But some people might find it annoying, or just parents just can, again, come on, translate here or there. But what about bilingual, meaning bilingual? When you feel that you're just losing your vocabulary in both of your languages, that you keep forgetting words, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, how do you say this? I just don't know anymore. I can't remember. And what about the whole thing about people making fun of your accent all the time? All the time. All the time. And it's true that, well, bilinguals could be hard, although the brain actually will see that the brain is awesome. The brain is awesome. What the brain can do, it's awesome. And sometimes you may find yourself in a situation when you're speaking Spanish to your boss who doesn't speak Spanish, and English to your mom. You're like, oh my God, I just became, right? So you could have those kind of situations. And before we continue, I'd like to chat with you a little bit more. And just I'd like you to get in, like, I don't know. Just tell me what you think about this. If you do speak another language, what are some challenges that you have when you speak that language? Do you consider yourself bilingual? And what does a person have to do or to be considered bilingual? Or how much do you think it affects your proficiency in Spanish or whatever is your second language? The fact that the English is the majority language in the U.S. Or have you ever felt deterred from speaking Spanish because people make fun of you, of your Spanish, actually? Have you ever heard people say, oh, he or she is Cuban, Peruvian, Colombian, but his Spanish is just horrible? about you or about other people that you know. How did that make you feel? I'd like you to just take maybe a couple minutes with your like a partner, group of 2 or 3, just very informally talk about these questions. Okay? Let's do it. Let's do it. Just talk about it. It seems like you have a lot to talk about, apparently. It seems that some of these questions are something that speak to you and maybe are related to your daily life, maybe even, right? So what are some of the challenges that you do find when you have to speak another language? Anyone? What challenges you? Yes. Finding the right words, which speaks again to what we said before about, oh my gosh, I cannot remember this. What is it that I have to say? I'm supposed to know this that I don't remember or I don't know, right? What else? Idiomatic expressions. That you may feel like you have in one language but not in the other one, and you're like, oh, how do I say this? And then sometimes the Spanglish resorts, right? And the other language comes up and say, hey, I can tell you in the other language. It is not exactly the same. We don't have like great synonyms that work perfect in both languages and in both situations. And then you're like, but if I say like this, I'm missing information. Yeah. I swear I'm funny and smart, right? In my language. Exactly. That's yeah. Anything else? And do you consider yourself bilingual? Who considers, and don't be, just own it. If you consider yourself bilingual, here, now. Eso es, así. Good. What does a, good, be proud. Nice. What does a person have to do to be considered bilingual or have to be? What are the, like, okay, you, yes, but you don't. Why? Tell me. Write it in a basic level. That's interesting. Good. Be fancy. When you feel like you can be fancy with both of your languages, then you're like, okay, I think I'm bilingual now. When you reach that level of, you attained bilingualism. So so once you become that automatic with the language, then you feel like you're bilingual. Okay, so that's what those of you who consider bilingual, that's what we have to be considered bilinguals. Let me just ask you something. Do you have to have? Well, I'm not gonna say anything. Just pew. We'll see in a minute. So okay, and. Do you think it affects your proficiency in Spanish, the fact that English is the majority language? Somehow, a little bit? I totally, 100% loved your story, which is the story that I'm going to tell today. Great. Wonderful. I like that. Any other comments? Have you ever felt deterred from speaking Spanish? people were either making fun of you, of your accent in Spanish, of your lack of knowledge, they would call it maybe in Spanish. I see some people like nodding. That's an excellent point. That is totally true. Oh, her family makes fun of her. We've heard. We'll talk about that too. Right. They're making you aware. They're making you like self-conscious about your Spanish, and then makes you like, you know what? I better just quiet. Yeah, be quiet. Well, for this or something that's done. Speak. Yeah. I communicate, and you understand, and we're having a conversation. What about that? That's a great point too. So we've heard. Have you ever heard the whole sentence of, "Oh, you are Colombian, but Spanish is kind of." I mean, they might not tell you in your face, but they're talking about you, or somebody's talking about somebody else that you know. From there, right there. Okay. So this isn't really interesting, and we're gonna really touch many of the topics that are arising here. But before we do that, we're going to try to debunk some myths about bilingualism. And the first is that bilingualism is a rare phenomenon. That is not true. That is what most people who come from monolingual countries believe. But actually, more than half of the planet, it's bilingual. Bilingualism is in all the sociopolitical status, in all group age, in many, many countries, even in countries that consider themselves monolinguals. Like maybe the U.S. may consider, oh, it's a monolingual country because we speak English here. We have over 50 million people in the U.S. who are bilingual. No, it's not a rare phenomenon. It happens many, many times in many, many places. Bilinguals have equal and perfect knowledge of their languages. That is not true either. That is called balanced bilinguals, and they do exist. They exist, but it's not the norm. What is more frequent is to have bilinguals who have more proficiency in one language versus the other, and they feel more comfortable in one of their languages. And that is what usually happens. But the whole idea of you need to know the same amount, I need to speak Spanish as well as English, it is attainable, but it's not the norm. So you don't need to be so hard on yourselves, right? Let's just keep it like that. Real bilinguals don't have an accent in their languages. It's not true either. Everyone has an accent. We all have accents. So it's not true. Even though you are bilingual, maybe you learned the language as a child, there's so many factors affecting the way you attain your bilingualism level that accent, it may be there. A type of accent that somebody, like they tell you, oh, so what part of the U.S. you are? And you're like, what? My accent? Maybe? I don't know what's going on. Bilingualism will delay language acquisition in children, and this actually is one of the arguments that is being used mostly against the concept of bilingualism. And it is not true. If your child, for any reason, reaches the milestone of speaking, which is a milestone that all children have to reach, like crawling and walking, moving, one of the milestones is speaking. If your child is a little bit delayed in that milestone, never let anyone to tell you that is because you are exposing the child to two languages, because it's not true. There are no scientific evidence to support that. Okay? So no. Speak. When you have children, speak to them in your languages, in all the languages you like. That will not be a problem. And with the same situation, it's so when people think that the language spoken in the house will have a negative effect on the acquisition of the language of the school. So, again, you speak both languages and then you go to school and they tell you, oh, but the kid is not picking up on English. You probably want just to lay the Spanish on the side and just speak English all the time to the kid so they can be up to speed. No, it's not because of that. The kid will be up to speed. It will not affect negatively the kid. Okay? And bilinguals acquire their two languages in childhood. No. I'm the perfect example. I was not a child when I acquired English. I was far beyond puberty. And maybe some of you might be thinking, but is she really bilingual? Oh, come on. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. And children raised bilingual will always mix their languages. That is not true either. So when children are born and when they are being brought up and they're learning their both languages, it is true that sometimes they mix the languages and they may say sentences with the structure of English and the words in Spanish or the other way around, right? But later on, as they grow up, as they develop their brains, those languages divide and each language goes to where it's supposed to be. That doesn't mean that the kid will now say one word here and there because of many different situations and many different reasons. Maybe the kid knows how to say, truck in English because at home doesn't have a camión. Maybe the toy, he only picked it up in the daycare. And truck, it's a word that he learned in the daycare. But at home, they don't have a camión. They just have a carro, but no a camión. So that he would say, Mommy, give me the carro, give me the car. Maybe they have both. Give me the car and the truck. Oh, my kid doesn't know how to say camión. Ooh, well, never exposed to him to that word. Why? Bilinguals express their emotions in their first language. That is not true either. And some of you may agree with me right now that for example, you maybe were raised in a household where Spanish was the first language that you learned and the first language that you spoke for the first 3, 4, 5 years of your life, right? And then you start going to school and then English comes. And everything's in English. Old school, like primary school, middle school, secondary school, now in the university, everything's in English. And now what used to be your first and primary language, Spanish, has become your secondary language. First language, because it's chronologically the first that you achieved, that you acquired, but it's your secondary language because now English has become your primary language. If that is the situation, it's likely that for some reason, sometimes some emotions you can express, you can feel more comfortable expressing those emotions in your second language that now has become your primary language. And maybe other emotions you feel better in your first language. It really depends. And why it really depends? Because being bilingual is not only one thing. There are several types of bilinguals. There are the early bilinguals, those ones who learned the language when they were children. The simultaneous bilinguals, so they were exposed to both languages at the same time, and they were learning both languages hand to hand. Or the sequential bilinguals, so they learn first one language and then the other language later in life, still maybe while children. with the sequential bilingual, we have the early sequential, maybe the first 4, 5, 6 years of their lives, they learn one language, let's call it Spanish, and then later when they start school, they learn English. That's early sequential bilingual. Or late sequential bilingual. So those kids that learn Spanish in the first 8, 9, 10 years of their lives, and then they come here and they go full stream to school, and now all of a sudden they learn English. They're still, this is before puberty, they're still called early bilinguals. Or then we have the receptive bilinguals. The receptive bilinguals are those who can understand, know what's going on, so have receptive skills, but will not talk. Don't have productive skills. They know what you're telling them. They understand what you're saying, but they would answer back to you in English, for example. It's very unlikely that they can read. Some of them can read, but feel very, very limited for that. And late bilingual, me, hello, yay. Those of us who learn the second language after puberty, and we talk about puberty because it's what's called the critical period, that it's when they say that the brain starts to get too mature to get the perfect aspects of bilingualism, and maybe in the phonological aspect gets a little bit more difficult to acquire the language. Doesn't mean that you cannot acquire. I'm speaking English, right? So I'm doing something right. But maybe I don't sound so native, right? But I'm still a bilingual, a late bilingual, but a bilingual. And biliterate. And biliterate are pretty much all of the above, except receptive, because they can really have productive skills, who can, as you can imagine, write and read in English and Spanish. Okay? And it seems like being bilingual is something that the media is picking up now. And they are echoing what the research says. And everyone is really interested now about being bilingual. Even the Chicago Tribune talks about how bilingualism can help against stroke, or how bilingualism affects your children's beliefs, right? Or, for example, in Univision, they have a video also about the benefits of bilingualism. Or the New York Times, actually, I chose one article that it's now this specific one, but they have several articles about bilingualism, and they talk about the superior social skills of being bilingual. Or TED Talks that tells us about the benefits of having a bilingual mind, creating bilingual minds. Another New York Times articles about the benefits and why bilinguals are smarter. So it seems that it's cool for the bilinguals, right? We're hip. Yay, yippee. But what does the research say? So the research tells us that it is true that monolinguals and bilinguals process the language in different ways. Bilinguals alters functions and structures of the brain and the connections between different parts of the brains and how those connections work. So much so, and it wires the brain in different ways than monolinguals, so much so that it can affect children who stop being exposed to the language in a very short age. Let me tell you about this interesting study where they took children who were adopted from China and took them to Canada. These children, when they were in China, they were 3 years old, and they were exposed to Chinese and were able to speak, understand everything in Chinese. And then they went to Canada to French-speaking families and became effectively monolingual speakers of French. So they took this group of people, of young adults, like you, young adults, and another group of active bilinguals of French and Chinese, and then another group of only French monolinguals. They have these 3 different groups, and they put them to do a few tasks. One of them being to hear what we call non-words, where are like a sequence of sounds that sounds like a potential word in a language, but it's not really a word. Like, let's say, Bapo. Have you ever heard the word Bapo in Spanish? Let me know. Because it's a non-word. But if you hear that, would you be like, oh, that could be a word in Spanish? Right? Why not? We have other things. Bapo, taco, sure. Why Bapo? Bapo could be a word. But they hear things like this. And the very interesting part is that the brain activity and the parts of the brain that light up in these adopted children were exactly the same as the part of the brains and the brain activity that the active bilingual children have. So they were effective monolingual speakers of French, like the monolingual speakers of French, but their brain was wired up in the same way as the bilinguals. So it affects the way the brain is wired forever, right? The researchers also talk about the bilingual advantage, and there's extensive publications and evidence showing that bilinguals have higher abilities to attend the relevant information and disregard the less important information. Researchers talk about the superior cognitive functions and abilities of the bilinguals. This is called the bilingual advantage. However, there are some groups of researchers that were not able to replicate these results, especially with young adults. And they say that these superior abilities are not only exclusively because they are bilinguals, but they might be other factors accounting for it. There's something to be said, though, that usually these studies are done by researchers that work in universities that have access to young adults, just like you. And what happens is with young adults, just like you are at the peak of your cognitive development and your cognitive skills. This is the best as it gets, so enjoy it now. And when you have that, it is more difficult to see any differences due to bilingualism or due to anything, right? So we have to keep that in mind. What other things that we find is that bilinguals activate both of their languages in parallel. Whether you're using one or two, doesn't matter. Both languages are competing for attention. And what is interesting, a very recent study was found that what drives more brain activity is to switch off a language. So me keeping my Spanish quiet right now is driving more activity in my brain than to bring the Spanish back. Okay? Something else that it's found is that bilinguals have healthier white matter, delays the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia, which is now a small thing. Doesn't mean that we will not get it. It means that the symptoms show up later in life, 4 to 5 years later in life. Hey, I'll buy for 4 or 5 years. Why not? And bilinguals, to be specific, multilingual children or children who are being exposed to multilingual languages are better at considering someone else's perspective to understand what they mean. You remember what I showed you before, the superior social skills of bilinguals? This is what it means. It's a way of empathy, right? There are studies showing that it's true. And less scientific thing is, well, kind of things that you mentioned before, that it helps you understand your own language and culture better, and other languages and other cultures better, that encourages new ways of thinking, that increases your empathy, right? So what about the disadvantages then? If everything's so cool, what are the disadvantages? It's kind of what you were pointing out before. The disadvantage is that researchers have found that the verbal skills of bilinguals in each language tend to be generally weaker when you compare to monolinguals. So, for example, if we compare my verbal skills in Spanish with a monolingual speaker of Spanish and my verbal skills in English with a monolingual speaker of English, my verbal skills tend to be weaker than their verbal skills. What it means, verbal skills? Slower lexical retrieval, which is exactly this poor lady crying because she can't remember and she forgets that. It's not like you don't know the word. It's just like it takes forever to remember it. And then we experience the tip of the tongue feeling like, oh, ¿cómo se dice? En la punta de la lengua. I have it here, right here, at the tip of the tongue, right here. It's found that more bilinguals feel that more frequently than monolinguals. Okay, and the vocabulary size, which is related to those. Well, it's a verbal skill, and when they compare the vocabulary size of each of their languages to the monolinguals, it seems like bilinguals have a smaller vocabulary size than the monolinguals. However, there are many researchers calling for this, saying, hey, we need to count the entire repertoires of bilinguals because they may have two labels for the same thing. So I have two labels for this. I have botella and bottle. I should count two words, right? Because that's part of my vocabulary. That's part of my lexicon. And when we do that, bilinguals have a bigger amount of vocabulary, right? So just think about that. And the social cost. People make fun of bilinguals because of their accent. That's true. And let's not talk about people discriminating against the bilinguals because they speak another language, because then we'll be going to politics and we're not supposed to. Go vote today. Yeah. Anyway, that's that. So, but still, bilingualism is considered a gift and an advantage. So then, how come no more people are bilinguals? What are some other obstacles? Well, bilingualism is not more supported? And to answer that, I'm going to talk about the article that maybe I think it was spread out. It's called The Spanish Lesson I Never Got at School. And for this, I'd like you to see some of the quotes. In the 70s, Spanish was the language of poverty and backwardness in the eyes of some school administrators and many others. I never took supposedly we got smarter by forgetting Spanish. By the time I was a teenager, I spoke the language at the level of a second grader. My English was perfect, but in Spanish, I was a nincompoop. By the way, I learned that word the other day. I loved it. You never stop learning. That's another really cool thing. I never took a class in Spanish grammar or Spanish literature, nor was I ever asked to write a single word with an accent or a squiggly tilde over it. It was only as a fluent Spanish speaker that I finally came to know my true self, who I was and where I came from. No one disputes that every child in this country should learn English, but the no Spanish dictate amounted to a form of cultural erasure. It was a cruel, short-sighted act, born of ignorance and intolerance. In Europe, most people speak more than one language. Some speak 3 or 4 or more. Multilingualism is a sign of intellectual achievement and sophistication. And I do come from a country, Spain, where we have 4 languages. One of them, as you can imagine, is Spanish. It's the official one, it's the one speaking in the entire country. But we have 3 more. We have Catalan, we have Galician, we have Basque. And those 3 are co-official. And they are promoted and fostered by the government. So yes, it's true that in Europe people speak many languages. So I'd like you to get together and just talk a little bit about what these quotes speak to you. How do you feel about what they say? Just a couple minutes, what do you think about what is said in this article? 2 minutes. Okay, so these quotes are going to help me to talk to you about some factors that affect bilingualism attainment. Some of these factors are at the macro level, some are at the micro level. And for example, the socio-political situation, language policies, language ideology, and access to bilingual education do affect the level of bilingualism. For example, we can see in the 70s, Spanish was the language of poverty, backwardness in the eyes of some school administrators and many others. This speaks about the sociopolitical situation, how that situation affects language policies, and how those language policies are influenced by language ideology. And language ideology is a set of values and beliefs about languages or variants of languages, about what is the right thing to speak, how is the right thing to speak, where's the good language to speak, and so forth. And those administrators believed that Spanish was bad, was the language of poverty. In fact, they got smarter by forgetting Spanish. That's a direct influence of language ideology in language policy. So it does affect how then later people can become bilingual or not, or have access to bilingual education. I never took a class in Spanish grammar or Spanish literature, nor was I ever asked to write a single word with an accent or a squiggly tilde over it. As you can see, everything is a little bit intertwined, right? At the micro level, we see some linguistic insecurity as another factor. And as you can imagine, linguistic insecurity is that feeling of feel insecure because of your skills in a language. By the time I was a teenager, I spoke the language at the level of a second grader. My English was perfect. No insecurity there with English. Pretty secure, pretty confident. But in Spanish, I was an nincompoop. I like that word, nincompoop. I've been repeating it for the last few days now. So there you have it. See how when your people come to you and they say, oh, but you don't speak that well. Then you stop feeling, well, you know what, I'm not going to be, I would just better stop speaking Spanish altogether. And one less problem that I have in my life. So it does affect. Or questions related to identity. It was only as a fluent Spanish speaker that I finally came to know my true self, who I was and where I come from. Other factors like motivation, attitude, or the support of your family and community are really strong factors that affect the bilingualism attainment. With the family support, which is called the intergenerational transmission, being totally key for maintenance of the language, to keep the language. If you do have that family support, if you do have that family transmitting the language from one generation to the other one, then you have a good chance of keeping the language. But if you don't even have that, it's going to be very difficult. Okay? So, okay, all of these factors, what's going on in Miami? Where's the situation here? Do we have many bilinguals? Who are those bilinguals? What kind of bilinguals are they? I told you about sequential bilinguals. I told you about all of them. Oh, yeah, I like that. See, you're like, all of them. Do we have many here? Do we have many bilateral bilinguals? Yes, no. Ooh, I like that. But can you tell me? Do you have your hand eyes? Hello? Here. Not as many. Okay, not as many. Anything else? We have some, but not as many as we could have. And not as many as we could have. What can contribute or hinder bilingualism in Miami? Schools. Right. Access to school, maybe. Access to what else? Bilingual education. Bigotry. Oh, yeah. We have that too, unfortunately. So it does contribute to bilingualism, the fact that Spanish is pretty much everywhere. And Let's see how Spanish is everywhere in Miami exactly. Let's see the landscape. Miami is the most diverse Latino population in the U.S. in terms of origins and socioeconomic status. With 70% of Miami proper, which pretty much means Miami-Dade County, being Latino or Hispanic, 70% of the population. It's not small. Of course, granted, 70% of Latino doesn't mean 70% of people speaking Spanish. You can be Latino and not speak Spanish. But we have a good chance of finding some Spanish speakers over there. Then it's also considered a bilingual city with a constant influx of immigrants, right? Which makes it very good, as a very good place to keep the language alive. And it's the Latino population with the more foreign-born people than any other major city in the U.S. It's also the most dialectal diverse Spanish-speaking city because we have people from Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Puerto Rico, the República Dominican, Honduras, Spain, everywhere, Mexico, everywhere. So many dialects right there. So everything's looking nice for Spanish and being bilingual, right? But do find language shift. When we see studies on Miami-born second and third generations people, the language shift is happening. What does this mean? The first generation is the generation of the people who arrive, maybe the grandparents who arrive here, and they are Spanish speakers, and they have to learn English. Some of them do learn it, some of them don't, and they're struggling. The second generation is that generation of people who tend to be born here, and they tend to be really good at being bilingual. They speak Spanish and English, then translating to their parents here and there, whatnot. But the third generation is the grandchildren of the first one. And depending on how good job they've been doing about the language being transmitted from one generation to the other, the third generation is starting to lose the language. And that is seen in many parts of the U.S., and is also seen that is happening here in Miami. So in a study that I'm conducting, and it's an ongoing study right now, we find that some of the factors that I talked about before can be seen here. And the family and community support is really found here. And we find people that say, hey, my family wanted me to keep the language. So that's some family support. But also some other people that say, hey, my family only spoke to me in English because they really wanted me to adapt quickly. And even though they had good intentions, that affected the level of proficiency in those children later on. Or people or how identity affected the level of attainment and bilingualism. And people saying that they wanted to learn about their culture, how proud they were about where they were from. Also, linguistic insecurity, and how, hey, that's what we talked about before. I've been told that I have a bad Spanish, or people say, hey, but I thought you spoke Spanish. What's that? You know? Or motivation. I want to have a conversation in Spanish and not think about whether I'm saying something right or wrong or if it sounds well. Or the motivation of speaking to people from so many other places. Speaking Spanish opens the door to talk with people from many different, from every part of the world. Bilingual education. Here in Miami, we do have bilingual education programs. And the language ideology. In my school, I learned Spanish from Spain. So it's like the proper Spanish. Oh, the Spanish in Miami is not the correct one. Ew. Because I'm a linguist and I'm from Spain, I'm going to tell you something. This is pure language ideology. There's nothing that makes the Spanish from Spain being the proper one or the good one. There's absolutely nothing linguistically speaking, scientifically speaking, that makes any language to be more proper than any other one. This is the ideology that is all around, that we all agree apparently for some reason. We're not going to talk about the reason. But there's nothing really to make that Spanish better than other. So let's now go that road. that route. I find, let me see, getting a little bit over. Well, it's been found more things about, I have found more things about perceptions and expectations related to the sense of community, or the general cambios, generational changes. Like this one, talking about the abuelita is upset with the grandchildren who can't speak or hardly speak. My younger sister knows it, but doesn't speak much. And my younger brother doesn't speak it, and he doesn't see the point to learn it. So even within one family, we have the grandmother keeping the language. The mother probably keeping the language too. The older sister being able to speak. The second sister, among the siblings, the second sister is more of a receptive bilingual. The third one, I don't speak it, and why do I need it? More language ideology. I don't see the point, right? Or people feeling like they are part of a community. There's a community in Miami that are exactly like me, whose parents are from Hispanic countries, but they themselves are not from that country. I think I'm in fact part of that community. There are people like me, we don't have the exact same stories, but we are from the same country. And we may speak a bit different, but at the end of the day, we have very similar stories. I need to speak Spanish, not because I'm Cuban, but because I'm part of a greater community. The last thing I'm just going to say is that we find that here in Miami, there's people talking about how important it is Spanish also in the workplace. It is considered a kind of a given. It's also expected in the professional setting, even when it's not specifically in the job description. It is right there. So if that is the situation, that Spanish seems to be so important for personal reasons, professional reasons. And we know that being bilingual can enhance the opportunity for professional reasons. Do we have many young speakers being bilingual in Miami? Not as many as we like to. So let's just set some common goals all together and not forget this. Be proud of your superpowers. Be proud of being bilingual. Being bilingual means a lot. You can do many things. You can see the world in different ways. You may have your free gymnastics in your brain. You should promote and foster inclusion and pride, like in this case. Just have children that feel proud of the Spanish or the other language that they bring, and still teach them some English, but let's not forget the language that they bring in, and let's teach them also the rules of Spanish. Here in FIU, we're doing a little part with the Spanish Heritage Language Program that is designed for heritage speakers. We are a group of bilinguals, and I invite you to come to the website from the Modern Languages Department and see what kind of program we have. We have a couple courses that is totally designed for this. It's thought to enhance the skills that bilinguals already have and work on the skills that they need to work to promote balanced bilateral bilinguals. And that is all. Yeah. Oh.
By Academic Video Services within the Division of Information Technology at Florida International University.